Hello, everyone. This is Julie Matthews. I'm excited that you're with us today. If you're joining us, I'm going to go over to the chat area and see. If you're joining us, feel free to say hi. Tell me who you are, where you're from, if you're a practitioner or what type, anything you want to introduce yourself. I'd love to learn a little bit about you, so don't be shy. And I see that we have people rapidly joining us. So I'm going to give people maybe a minute while people are joining to go ahead and introduce themselves. And that way I will also know that you can hear me, you can see me, and that we're all set. So I'm going to launch my slide presentation so that I can make sure that you can see that. And then, let's see here. Give me 1 second. All right, once I get that launched, I'll let you know. Okay. So right now I should have launched my PowerPoint. You should be able to see it. And I'm go over to my chat area and see who's with us. I see Christine's with us. Ooh, from the Sunshine Coast, dear. Love the Sunshine Coast. Hello. All right. We've got someone that was on the last call with us, Plan. Good to have you join us as well. Wonderful. Someone else from Australia. Great. I specifically did this webinar at 4 o'clock because we have a lot of Australia fans and followers and wonderful people. So I'm glad to see you on the call. I'm glad the time frame worked out. We had Anne from Virginia. Great. Tina is a naturopath and a homeopath specializing in autism. That's great. I'm excited to have you join us. Gladys from Orlando. Great. All right, we've got, Anna from Peru. We love Peru. I don't think I saw you when I was in Peru last time, but I was in Peru about 18 months ago, and I just absolutely love your country, love your food, and all the amazing sacred sites and things that you have there. So welcome. All right, boy, we've got Sophie from Ghana, and we have Sama from England. Wow, we have people all over the place. So I'm going to go ahead while you're joining us. Welcome, everyone. And I'm so thrilled to have so many of you from so many places joining on the line, and we'll have more people as we go here. Nicole is a pediatric occupational therapist. All right. All right, Teresa, welcome. All right, Doris from Texas. I'm going to let you all introduce yourself. Anna was saying that she wished she had heard. It was actually, I actually spoke to practitioners, so you didn't actually miss anything. But anyway, it was a lovely country that you're in, and your food is amazing. Maybe my favorite thing is the beef heart. I love eating heart, and you have just the most amazing spices. So anyway, we'll just get going. Welcome to have a bunch of you join us, including, looks like, Troy's family physician. So I'm going to jump in and get started. And I'm so glad that you're joining me for this conversation. And I'm going to be sharing with you my BioIndividual nutrition mini course. And I'm a practitioner. I'll share a little bit about myself, and I do a training. And the training has 12 modules plus an additional autism course. And today we're going to go through the modules, and I'm going to give you tips from every single module. The first 10 out of 12 modules we're going to go through so that you can have information that can get you started in your practice right away, tips you can use, further things you can check out. We might have some parents joining us as well. Some people that joined us for the last call where I spoke with parents that want to take their knowledge to the next level. So welcome, everyone. I want to just start by sharing a little bit about me if you don't already know, but some of you may have seen me on my recent summit or seen me other places, so I won't belabor it too much. I am the creator and the instructor at the BioIndividual Nutrition Institute and Nourishing Hope, and I'm a certified nutrition consultant. I'm a published researcher. I am an author, a speaker. As you can see, I speak all over the world, and I'm thrilled to have spoken to so many parent groups as well as physician groups. So I'm glad to be with you today. A little bit about my story. I've been working with families and children with autism for 16 years. I have seen children recover. I've seen children lose their autism diagnosis. I have seen diet and nutrition be a key piece of that recovery puzzle. And interestingly, as we're going to talk about in this session today, it has taught me about all sorts of different chronic diseases and how you can use nutrition and food in a bioindividual manner to help anybody with anything they're dealing with, pretty much, because we're going to talk about today how the underlying causes and contributing factors are very similar, and we can use a lot of the approaches that I've learned over the years of working with families to help people with a variety of different complex conditions. So this is the mini course that we're going to go through today. I'm going to be sharing the guidebook with you later, so if you stay on till the end, our system's pretty cool. It tracks people that join, and so we know if you're here, and we know if you stay. So if you join us today, I'm going to get you the guidebook, and so it's all the slides as well as some additional information for you. So I hope you enjoy that. Today we're going to go through my course, as I said, module by module, and we are going to hit highlights from all of these different modules. So we're going to start with the foundations of bioindividual nutrition. We're going to go into a variety of different special diets. We're going to look at what good nutrition looks like and go through my food pyramid I created. We're going to talk about the gluten-free, casein-free, and allergen-free diets, then the specific carbohydrate diet versus a GAPS diet. We're going to talk about dysbiosis and diets that are good for gut support, like the FODMAPs, body ecology, and others. We're going to talk about low phenol diets, low amines, low histamines, low glutamates, low salicylates. We're going to then go into oxalates and the low oxalate diet, paleo, low carb, ketogenic. We're going to talk about methylation, mitochondrial support, all in our call today. And then I'll share a little bit with you about what it all looks like and how, if I can support you, where you can learn more. All right, oops, I went a little fast there. As I go through, we're going to be sharing case studies, clinical tips, and common mistakes practitioners often make. And I think it's 14 clinical tips that I have for you today as we go through. And as part of that, in addition to the case studies and the tips, I'm going to be sharing some common mistakes that practitioners often make and how you can avoid making those mistakes. All right, so we'll start with module 1, which is bioindividual nutrition foundations. So really, I think that this discussion really deserves a conversation to get us started about what we've learned from autism, and particularly what I have learned. I find that after going very, very deep into one chronic condition, which is autism, I have learned so much about chronic disease in general. And I often tell people, and some of you on the call right now that are either in pediatrics or specializing in autism, I see a bunch of you, Christine, Laurel, all sorts of people. What you probably know is that if you can help somebody with autism, you can probably help anybody with anything, because I feel it's one of the most complex conditions. And so we're going to use it as a model, as an understanding of what I've learned, and also explain how scientifically it relates to everything we're talking about with pediatrics, but also much further beyond that as well. So if you're a parent on the line or you're a practitioner that specializes in something else, there'll be something for all of you. So autism, I really believe that children with autism are the canaries in the coal mine. They're telling us that our world is too toxic. We're too deficient in nutrients. I'm going to do one more thing here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to drink some water. It's with the toxins in our world, the deficiencies, the poor diet, and everything else that's going on, kids are having challenges. And, it's one thing if you are 85 years old and things are starting not to work well and you're losing maybe your cognitive function or something. It's a totally different thing when you're 3 and things like that come up. It can be scary. And obviously, parents know there is something they need to do or they need to seek some help. And so for good or bad, we have learned so much from families with autism and individuals with autism that we can apply to so many other conditions. And so that's what I really want to share with you today. So autism is a neurological condition. So what I mean by that is it is a condition where where the biochemistry of the body affects the biochemistry in the brain. This is not an isolated brain condition where sort of a mysterious disorder. This is any kind of neurological issue is a biochemical, is a whole body condition. And everything going on in the body is going to affect what's happening in the brain. So the good news about that is there is something you can do about it. If you look at mainstream medicine, they'll tell you that this is just how it is. This is how your system is. You're going to have it forever. And in mainstream medicine, I encourage you to go search for answers. You'll probably find that they don't really have any medical solutions for autism. Now, there are medical solutions, but what it is addressing the underlying factors, addressing nutritional needs, addressing medical needs that manifest as autism. But if you go and you say, okay, I'd like a pill for autism, I like a medical approach for autism, there really aren't any. And so the exciting thing here is there are, and we're going to talk about what they are today. We're going to talk about ways that you can do that through nutrition. There's also a variety of other ways to address neurological conditions, broader ones, infections, Lyme, mold, other things that might be going on that someone might need medical help with as well. And there looks like there's some NDs and some MDs and pediatricians and things on the line. But today's conversation, we are going to focus it on how do we use bioindividual nutrition to support children with autism and people with a wide variety of chronic conditions. So when you see it as a whole body disorder, you can see that as you work on healing the body, you can affect the brain and you can improve autism, which I know I'm belaboring the point, but is something that mainstream will tell you isn't possible. And I'm here to tell you, I have seen it hundreds of times. It is possible. So what are the causes? People always ask me if I go to a practitioner event or I go to dinner with someone, one of the first questions they always ask me is, well, what causes autism? And my understanding from a vast amount of research that I have done is it's a combination of genetic predispositions and environmental assaults. And those two things together are what cause some people to have autism and others to have ADHD, digestive disorders, whatever it happens to be. So you maybe we all have certain areas of our genetics that are stronger or weaker than others. And if we have the right or wrong combination of environmental assaults and factors, that can trigger certain disorders. And so that's really the framework of our conversation today. And the really, I think, interesting thing about this is that nutrition is that link in between. So let's say you have some genetic polymorphisms, and let's say you've got some methylation challenges or MTHFR or whatever it might be. You can use nutrition to support those genetic weaknesses, let's call them. If you have had environmental assaults, sure, we can try to avoid new ones in the future, but maybe we've gotten a bit depleted or injured somehow from them. We can often use diet and nutrition as a way of bridging that gap between those two. So some of the underlying factors that I see play out in autism are the immune system, the detoxification system, and the digestive system. Those are just a few of the kind of big buckets that I see. And then we're looking at, what does that mean? So if we have the immune system that's not working well, we can't fight pathogens, and yet we have an overactive immune response that creates a lot of inflammation that we can't turn off. We might have mitochondrial dysfunction. Our mitochondria and the energy in our cells is not being produced as it needs to, and it's not burning cleanly. So now we get oxidative stress. We have oxidative stress. We need good detoxification. So if we got oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction and then poor detoxification, we can't mop up all of the inflammatory and oxidative stress factors that are coming into play. We know that people with autism have methylation issues and transsulfuration issues. We know that with the work of Dr. Jill James, of Ben Lynch, of Rosemary Waring, all of these people looking at methylation, transsulfuration, and sulfation. So a lot of biochemical pathways. We're going to talk too, well, we'll talk about in a second, how there's a lot of other conditions that also have those similar challenges. We know poor digestion is practically at the root of every health issue known to man. If you have poor digestion and poor gut function and poor microbiome, it could manifest in almost any condition you could get. And if your gut is not healthy, you're not going to be healthy. So how does this relate? So we see this in autism, but we also see these things in all sorts of other conditions. And this was a big aha moment for me. So after working with family after family after family and helping their child, I always recommend that the entire family do the diet principles. And so what I found was, mom, her IBS was getting better, or her ulcerative colitis, or whatever this bowel condition she has might get better. Dad's migraines might get better. Siblings' ADHD gets better. And I started to look at some of these things and I realized, look, methylation is a factor in anxiety, depression, so many of the things that we see here. We see inflammation at the root cause of pretty much every chronic disease, including the ones we're talking about. We see, of course, poor digestion and microbiome imbalance in all of these conditions. So then I started to realize, let me dig into this further. So I started to look more at, okay, I know that sulfation is an issue in autism. What else is an issue? What else is it an issue for? Well, we know it's an issue for ADHD. We knew in the 70s it was an issue in ADHD. We know there's science in autism. We now know more recently that it's also an issue in a variety of irritable bowel conditions and depression and all sorts of things that we see here. So that was a big aha moment for me when I realized, we think of autism as this sort of mysterious condition, but if we look at these underlying factors in these systems that we see in all sorts of chronic disease, autism is a chronic disease like all others. It's just that these children get it a lot younger than other people might because their developing brain is very vulnerable to many of these conditions. So if you develop healthfully for 20 years and then you get some of these things, it's going to manifest as something different than if you had these exposures or these situations happen earlier. So the approach, no matter what you're dealing with, what condition, my experience is applying a bioindividual nutrition approach is going to help a variety of different conditions. And so I actually teach my training course for people with a wide variety of conditions. In fact, I think about 70% of the people are not necessarily autism specific people. We have lots of autism people. We love that. And they love us because, we're speaking the same language. But if your topic isn't autism, that's okay. I want to just use this as a model and a framework for how I came to this understanding that you can use and apply in your practice, whatever that might be. If it's children, if it's adults, and whatever that condition might be, I am pretty confident you're going to find gems in this that are going to support you. All right, so let's see here. So let's go into that bioindividual nutrition framework. So there are 6 pillars in my framework, and they look into understanding chronic disease as a whole, which we'll do, then determining bioindividuality and how I do that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to, then pillar 3 is discovering how foods affect biochemistry. 4 is mastering all the different special diets. 5 is creating a customized bioindividual nutrition strategy based on all that information. And pillar 6 is evolving the diet over time. Because as you'll see, my approach is not to be stuck on the same diet for your whole life, but to evolve the diet, to heal the system so that you can go back to the most well-rounded, robust diet that you or your client or patient can tolerate. We don't want to take out nutrient-dense foods if the person can tolerate them. And this is really a different philosophy than a lot of people, because after working with these different diets for so long, I've discovered that when you're not gonna be necessarily in that same place, as you evolve. So what I find is that with some special diets, they'll tell you all about how to do the special diet, but they don't necessarily tell you how to get off the special diet. So I wanted to figure out, how can I not only give somebody what they need right now to relieve the burden on their system, but how can we restore that functioning so that we can have the least limited diet as possible? And I think that's really an important factor that a lot of people don't necessarily consider. So then the question becomes, which diet and which supplements? There are all sorts of food compounds that are in different foods: salicylates, histamines, amines, oxalates, FODMAPs, glutamate, different polysaccharides and disaccharides. And these are some of the compounds that we're going to talk about today. Really the goal and the $1 million question, and the thing I'm always striving to teach people how to do, is how to determine the specific foods that need to be removed without overly restricting the diet. And that to me is really important because, as I said earlier, there are a lot of nutrient-dense foods that we want to keep in the diet. So if you start to say, ooh, I might have a problem with these 5 things, salicylates and amines and oxalates and grains, and you've got nothing left. There's like 2 foods, and we cannot live or thrive on 2 foods. We need variety and diversity and all of that. So my goal is to try to get as much of that as possible. So when we're inside those 6 pillars, if we go to pillar number 5, which is customizing a bioindividual nutrition strategy, one of the other questions people often ask me is, well, how do you do that? Well, I have a multi-phased approach to do that. I am looking at a whole host of factors, not just one thing. So I'm looking at what foods do they crave. That tells us a lot about foods that they are not processing well. Not just foods that they might crave and need, but very often foods that they're craving because there's something biochemically that's not getting processed right. I'm going to look at the diet record and how frequently they eat certain foods. I'm going to look at known reactions that they have. So when they come in, I know I don't do well with onions. Then I'm trying to dig apart, okay, well, is it FODMAPs? Is it salicylates? What is that thing? So I'm then looking at common symptoms that we see associated with these foods. And after doing this, I'll show you some of them later, dozens and dozens of symptoms, and then also clustering those symptoms. So fatigue might be a problem in 42 different disorders, but or pretty much every disorder, many of them. So how do we determine if that is an important factor? Well, if it's mixed with this, and this symptom, I'm going to be more likely to suspect one thing over another thing. So I'm looking at all of those things, plus what do their labs look like? What does it look like? How's their mitochondria functioning? What does their microbiome look like? How does their digestion seem to be working? What foods can we test that they're reacting to? Those kinds of things. Then we look at genetics. We look at their SNPs. We look at what we think might be expressing, and also other client considerations. So one of the things I realize is you can't just make anybody do anything. You have to work within their limitations or their needs. And this is something that seems really self-evident, but you'd be surprised how many times I hear practitioners take this very stern approach of like, this is what you must do if you're going to heal. And, if the person can't do it because they travel too much, because they have a really significant picky eater, we need to work our way there. Yes, we still might want to get there, but how do we help them get there? How do we have compassion for where they are? How do we make a plan that might start with baby steps or might jump into the deep end? It depends what their capacity is. And that is something that I see a lot of practitioners make a mistake on. So I'm going to be looking at all of these things. I'm going to look at their common symptoms. Does that relate to the foods that they eat frequently? Does that relate to the foods they crave? Does that relate to other known reactions that might be consistent? Does that relate to the systems that we see affected? That's how I'm going to determine which diet or which combination of diets somebody needs. So just be aware to, use a multifactorial approach when you're doing this. So my clinical tip number 1 is when determining dietary direction, consider as many influential factors as possible. And so I've just explained and described those here to you. Let's go on to module 2 in the training, and that's special diet, an overview of all the different special diets. So here are the diets that we cover in the training. There's probably even more than this at this point. There's always more that are coming up on our Facebook group and other places as well that we talk about. Today we're going to talk about gluten-free, casein-free, specific carbohydrate, GAPS, paleo, fine gold, fail-safe, low oxalate, low FODMAPs, and ketogenic. So hopefully that's enough for you in one day. But in the training, just to give you a sense, we also talked about the use of rotation diets and elimination diets. We talk about autoimmune paleo and how to adapt that. We talk about the body ecology diet. We talk about different types of ketogenic diets. We talk about an MCT ketogenic diet, a modified Atkins diet. We then talk about vegetarian diets, raw food diets, vegan diets, low glycemic, low sugar or sugar-free, low starch, nightshade-free, low lectin, low sulfur, low purine. I don't want to overwhelm you, but that's what I've always done. I guess my personality is one that I don't like dogma. And I've just, early in my practice, started to see people that would come to my practice and say, this diet worked really well for me. So I'm looking at, okay, what was it that worked really well, and trying to figure that out. Who does really well on this diet? But then I would find people that would say, this diet was terrible for me. And the thing that really frustrated me with that was they'd go on to some of the diet-specific boards and say, this diet's not working for me. And they would get jumped on by 12 people in the community saying, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it hard enough. You're not doing it strict enough. You're not good enough. You just need to do it better. So they would do it better and they would get worse. And that really upsets me. It wasn't true. That diet, and the other part that drives me crazy is when people say, well, you must do this one diet. This diet is the only diet that's going to heal your child. If you don't do this diet, your child is never going to get better. So firstly, as a Nourishing Hope person, that just struck my chord of that is so not Nourishing Hope. And it's also scientifically not true. So that is one of the big reasons I just kept doing what I was doing in my practice, kept my head down, figured out who does this work well for? Who does this not work well for? How do we find the right diet for the person? How do we combine diet principles when we need to? How do we ignore certain ones that aren't important? How do I put something customized together that's going to be the most effective for that person? And that's really what this is all about. So let's dive into some of these. Let me just tell you a little bit about module 3, and then modules 6 through 9 go into diving. 4 through 9 go into diving into all of those diets I just described to you. So module 3 is about getting good nutrition in, and so what I did was I created what I call the Nourishing Hope Food Pyramid, and the reason I did this was one day there was this new food pyramid that came out, or this new food plate or something that came out. And I realized it really wasn't meeting the needs of the people that I serve. So I thought, what does a healthy diet look like when you're not dogmatic about one diet principle or one diet? So then I started to think, well, let's make a hierarchy. Let's make it a pyramid. And let's put the things that are most easy to digest, most nutrient dense, easiest to digest and absorb, least likely to cause a reaction based on these types of biochemistry issues. Let's put those at the bottom. And then as we go up, maybe there are certain people that won't do some of the ones near the top. Like some people are not going to do grains at all. Even if they're gluten-free, they're going to take the gluten-free grains and legumes off, like paleo people or certain GAPS and SED people, for example. Or we might need to take out certain vegetables because they might be higher in oxalate or higher in salicylates or something. So that's basically how my approach is based on. And I want to talk a little bit about this just for all of your clients. You'll notice on my chart here that we've got the vegetables. We've got these are all non-starchy vegetables. and protein sources here. Over here, I've got starchy vegetables that are taken off for some people. And then a lot of people also don't do dairy. For people that do dairy, I have, some dairy over here, and it's different. Some people can do raw dairy. Some people can do A2 dairy. Some people do camel's milk, other things like that. So for the purpose of typically what I'm talking about when we get to some of the other modules, you'll see what I mean by fully casein-free. But for the purpose of this, I wanted to just share a little bit of my experience with the different types of dairy. So I have a chart that I use for my practitioners that shows the easiest to digest and the most tolerated. And the most tolerated start with, regular conventional cow's milk and work their way up to raw cow's milk, raw A2 cow's milk, raw goat and sheep milk, and raw camel's milk. Camel's milk is a particularly interesting topic to me because I've done such, I've seen such great results and responses from people, and because of the research I've done on it, it's a fascinating subject. So clinical tip number 2 is check tolerance. Consider the chemistry of a food and the individual biochemistry of your client. So for example, some people are going to be able to do raw versus pasteurized. Some are going to be able to do different types of beta casein molecules. Some people are going to do well with camel's milk because of the immune system factors. Some people aren't, even with camel's milk, because they've got autoantibodies to folate receptor, and they've got cerebral folate deficiency or something. So the tip is to check individual tolerance for these substances rather than placing a statement across the board. And then clinical tip number 2 is healthy foods can worsen symptoms for some people. So even just because it's healthy doesn't mean that it's tolerated. So you want to look out for common issues that can be caused by, let's say, spinach and oxalate, oxalates in spinach, or phenols in berries, or FODMAPs in onions, or histamine in bone broths. So just because a food is a health food or a healthy food doesn't mean that it's healthy for everyone. Module 4, I go into gluten-free and casein-free diets and other allergen-free diets. Gluten and casein, most of you, if you're practitioners, know this already. Gluten, the protein in rye, wheat, rye, and a variety of other grains. Casein, the protein in animal milk of any kind, although, as we said, they do vary. But when I am doing a gluten-free and casein-free diet, I always remove all animal milks because I don't know what, if and how they're reacting. So the only way to really get a sense of how do they do removing it is to remove it 100%. And then when I do a gluten-free and casein-free diet, I always remove soy as well. So for me, GFCF really means gluten-free, casein-free, and soy-free. It's just a tongue twister to say GFCF, so I usually just simplify it. But the reason I include soy is because it's equally inflammatory to the gut. It's broken down by the same enzyme. It can also create opioids. So if you have these proteins in your diet, you don't have sufficient DPP4 enzyme, you have a leaky gut that allows these large food proteins to leak through. Now those proteins can fit in the opiate receptor and cause opioid activity, just like heroin and morphine and any of those substances can. They can be very addicting for your clients. You might find if you work with pediatric clients that they have that they might have these very addictive behaviors, like waking up in the middle of the night and sneaking something. That is often caused by those opioid compounds. And that really picky eating often can be caused by that as well. So some of the conditions we see with gluten intolerance, I won't even go through them all. They're listed here. There are probably hundreds of them. Probably if you're a practitioner on the line, you're probably familiar with why you'd want to avoid gluten. So I won't really belabor that one for our conversation. The reactions can be IgE, IgG, other inflammatory response. They can be opiate responses. They can be leaky gut responses, autoimmune responses, that cerebral folate deficiency I mentioned, and all sorts of other responses. In fact, maybe some that have even yet to be discovered, because we see this reacting to so many people reacting to these. We just discover more and more ways that people don't do well with them. So the GFCF diet works by removing gluten and casein that cause digestive upset, neurological issues, and systemic symptoms in people that are not able to tolerate them for all of the following reasons. So we relieve that burden, we can heal the gut, we can improve absorption, and we can have systematic improvement. So clinical tip number 4 is if you don't remove gluten, or casein or soy for that matter, you may not see any benefit from the other interventions that you're doing. So if you're, like to say, if you're a practitioner and you're, whether it's vitamin C or a certain, let's say, any sort of intervention you might do, whether it's natural or otherwise, if your body is creating opiates, and it's basically like you're on morphine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, causing inflammation, pain, oxidative stress, digestive issues, microbiome issues. No amount of trying to get some favorite supplement of the month in is going to override that major component. So removing those foods is really important in order to progress. So clinical tip number 5, so when I went back to, in the people that have a problem with those foods, you often might not see any other improvement with all the other wonderful things that somebody might be doing until they address those underlying factors. In this case, my example was gluten or dairy. Clinical tip number 5, provide resources to help your clients succeed. So one of the things I find practitioners do, one of the errors I find that they often make, is being too overwhelming. And so gluten-free, casein-free is a simple but powerful diet, and yet clients can get overwhelmed by it. So if you can provide food lists, meal ideas, implementation guides, recipes, you can help reduce that overwhelm and help improve compliance and therefore get better results. And obviously that is going to help your client have confidence in you, stay motivated, and keep doing things that are going to add to more improvement over time. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about Module 5, which goes into SED versus GAPS. So the SED and GAPS diet, they have a similar food list. The GAPS diet was based on the SED diet with additional principles that were added in by Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, both of them being wonderful diets. The foods that are avoided are going to be grains and corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, most beans, but not all, definitely soy. They don't allow sugars except for things that would naturally be in fruit or in honey. No starches or thickeners, no pectins, no chocolate and carob, no baking powder, things like that. But what they can eat, non-starchy vegetables, fruit, honey, certain beans they allow in the more advanced stages. Of course, things like meats and fish and eggs if you tolerate them, and nuts and seeds if you tolerate them, oils and ghee, depending. I will often do ghee for clients. I have found if they choose a certified casein-free brand that's been tested, I haven't yet seen issues in people. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for people that are highly allergic and could go into anaphylactic shock or something. But for people that have sensitivity, I usually find that ghee does well, both whether it's on an SED style diet or a GFCF diet. So I guess that could be tip number 15. And then they do allow lactose-free dairy, but when I suggest implementing this for kids on the spectrum, I do not do dairy. And you'll notice the beginning stages of GAPS, since it was adapted for kids like we're talking about, doesn't allow dairy in those beginning stages. I typically don't ever add dairy back because I just find it to be such a problem. Okay. The SED and GAPS diet work by removing the disaccharides and polysaccharides that, when you're not able to break them down because you don't have good enzyme function and proper digestion, can become food for the bacteria, which cause inflammation, pain, diarrhea, bloating, further insufficiency in digestion, which can cause more bacterial overgrowth and a vicious cycle. So it helps to break that cycle, heal the gut, relieving the body, rebalancing the body, the bacteria, and all of that. A case study on this, I had a 3-year-old girl in my practice. She's older now. She was on a GAPS diet. Her new diet included, as the GAPS diet does, lots of broths and fermented foods. And she also liked bacon and coconut and those sorts of things. These are all allowed foods on a GAPS diet or a specific carbohydrate diet. They're all pretty much allowed on a paleo diet as well. So I'm not picking on any one of those particularly. But she was having these incontinence issues. She was having these daytime accidents. She was inattentive and sort of foggy thinking, a bit spacey, hyperactive, had some sleeping problems. So what we realized was, well, the GAPS diet is high in these compounds that she just can't process. So salicylates and amines were creating an issue for her. So when she removed those foods and stuck to the diet but modified it a little bit, the wetting stopped. She had a rash that was almost gone. Her sleeping improved. And then when she got the high amine foods again, the problems came back. So her mom knew that that was a direct association for her. So I just want to show you a little bit of how somebody might assess that. So in my training program, I have this computerized questionnaire, and it's got, these are just some of the symptoms. I mentioned I'd show you some of the symptoms. These are some of the symptoms that we look at. And so what you do is you just go and you click all the symptoms that would apply. So I did that for her so you could see. Hyperactivity, foggy thinking, urinary incontinence, sleep challenges, all of that. And you can see that it weighted her score, showing that these salicylates and particularly amines were above the threshold for her. And so that's, a tool we use that my practitioners will use to get an idea. And as you do this more and more and more, this is not meant to replace your expertise. It's just meant to get you kind of up to speed and seeing what areas you might want to look at more, where those common clusters are, and all of that to support you. So that's what we did in this case. And so clinical tip number 6 is about this case study. So for this 3-year-old girl on GAPS, consider customizing that GAPS diet. Consider reducing salicylates and amines in this example. Doing food trials can pinpoint reactions. And so just being aware that even some of these wonderfully nourishing foods, like I mentioned earlier, the bone broths and the fermented foods are wonderful. But if your system can't process them, then you might not do well on this diet. And it doesn't necessarily, it might mean do a different diet with your client. It also might mean just make some changes and adapt that more bio-individually for that person, which is what we did in that case. So clinical tip number 7 is the common mistake that practitioners make about being too rigid. So there are phases for the GAPS diet. There are certain food lists, but certain people don't tolerate them. So being flexible in your approach and not just sticking too rigidly to something. Not all foods on the allowed list are tolerated. So I always want to customize each of these diets every time. Now, I'm not Natasha Campbell McBride. So this is how I interact with these diets, where I love the principles of them. And I don't want to necessarily throw the diet away because it's a great diet and it's really working well for her. Just needed a little tweak to the diet. So, a modified version. So don't be too rigid. Look out for intolerances and make appropriate substitutes where necessary. And then clinical tip number 8 is that SCD and GAPS is inherently high in some problematic foods. So I'm always recommending to my practitioners to tailor the diet to meet the needs of the individual. So that might be a low amine or a low glutamate or a low FODMAPs or a low salicylate or a low oxalate. All of these food compounds can be high on this diet if you're not paying attention and if you're not aware of it. So you can do these diets, in this diet that would be low in those. You would just need to know what you're looking for, what symptoms you're looking out for, what foods you're suspecting, so you can make the appropriate modification to the diet. All right, module 6. So looking at dysbiosis and diets that can help with gut support. So the microbiome is hugely important, and it interacts with our genes and our environment, and it changes rapidly based on what we eat, and it's a really important piece of health. So give you an example of, in this module, I talk a lot about the body ecology diet, which is a wonderful diet, great for yeast overgrowth. She's got some antiviral protocols and different things as well. Donna Gates is, very smart. Also the low FODMAPs diet. We also talk about other diets that can affect the gut, like grains, and look at some of those diets like we were just talking about. But in this module, we're specifically highlighting anything that can affect the gut and the microbiome. And specifically, these 2 diets are discussed in more detail. So a quick case study about that. Grains are often one of the most difficult foods to digest and often probably the most problematic food for gut stuff after gluten, casein, and soy, in my, generalized opinion. But there's one pitfall that is not uncommon, which is assuming a grain-free strategy is always the right fit for digestive problems or enough by itself. And so in the case of one of my clients, she was a woman in her 40s. She had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And, so we were trying to pinpoint what was going on. We did a GAPS diet, or I suggested she try a GAPS diet, and it didn't reduce her symptoms. So, at the time she was frustrated from the diet being too restrictive and not seeing and you do too. You can double down and do the GAPS diet plus low FODMAPs, or you can move just to low FODMAPs. So part of it depends on your individual client and, their personality and some of those things we mentioned before. Are they overwhelmed and want to loosen it up and try a different set of principles, or do they want to double down now and go from there? So a couple things, I guess. The clinical tip is avoiding being too dogmatic. So in this case, the example was grain-free diets might not be, a grain-free diet might not be the right diet in this case for a digestive issue. For example, low FODMAPs diet might be better. It might be causing more symptoms for that individual person. So that's clinical tip 9. And now let's go into module 7 and go into phenols and salicylates. So phenols are basically this phenol ring or this aromatic ring bound to a hydroxyl group. The only reason I mention that is in the training program, I talk about how you can literally go look at any food or any substance and look at its chemical makeup and look at the little chemical structure, and you can tell whether it has phenols on it. But you can also look it up in a book if those common foods are in the book itself. The reason I mention this is that these compounds are in Artificial additives like artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives that are petroleum-based. Those are highly phenolic compounds. Salicylates that occur not only in things like salicylic acid, which is found in aspirin, but also can occur in plant foods, apples, grapes, berries, raisins, ketchup, herbs, spices, honey, almonds. And then phenolic amines, which are things like tyramine, which is found in bone broth. I mean, if we're going to get super technical, histamine is an amine, but not a phenolic amine, whereas tyramine is a phenolic amine. But for our conversation today, we won't get overloaded. But that is something that if you were interested in further training, we would talk about that. We talk about when it's just histamine, when it's a histamine issue, or when it's an amine issue. And if you can determine that, you can figure out different ways of supporting those underlying pathways to try to heal up what's going on so that they can go back to eating some of these foods in a more robust, well-rounded manner. This is a chart from my book, Nourishing Hope for Autism, and it goes into the top here. The top part is methylation. You need good methylation so you can get good transsulfuration, which is the green part, to build glutathione and to get enough cysteine. And then you need that working well in order to get sulfate. Sulfate is needed for an enzyme called PST that breaks down phenolic compounds. It's called phenol sulfotransferase. It stands for phenol, phenolic, sulfotransferase, which is a sulfur-based enzyme, basically. So the name says exactly what it does. It helps to break down those foods. And we know that kids with autism, kids with ADHD, people with a variety of neurological conditions, depression, gut issues, have poor sulfation. In fact, a recent study done by Rosemary Waring and Margaret Moss discovered that they believe that poor sulfation is a biomarker in all chronic disease. Now, that was their theory, or that was their hypothesis they led to try to test in the study that they did. And they found, they felt that they were able to show that. And so that's one of those examples where I say, okay, I discovered this or I learned this through my work with autism and ADHD, but this applies to such a wider range of concerns and issues. And we can use a lot of these great dietary strategies for that. I see so many amazing comments. I am going to get to the comments and make sure I answer questions. So how do they work? Well, for people with poor sulfation, you remove the things that are causing stress on the body, and then you work on replenishing and restoring those functions so that the system can function and work better. And now they can hopefully go back to eating more of those foods. Because this is one of those areas you don't want to limit these foods too much if you don't need to, because they're very nutrient-dense foods. So some of them, berries, apples, grapes. I talked about some of these almonds, honey, avocado, all sorts of wonderful foods. Amine foods are going to be, fermented foods, aged foods, slow cooked foods, all these, again, really wonderful foods. And then glutamate foods are going to often be removed as well because they are often a factor for a lot of people. These foods are rich in phytonutrients and antioxidants. In fact, polyphenols are those really wonderful, amazing antioxidants that, as their name implies, they are a phenolic compound. So we don't want to just avoid phenolic compounds. They are nourishing and healthy if we can process them. So my goal is to fix the things that are causing the problem tolerating them so they can eat more of them rather than avoiding them forever. So clinical tip number 7 is avoiding the common mistake of being too restrictive. So phenolic foods are rich in nutrients. Don't over-restrict them more than necessary. There are provocative tests that you can do to determine what threshold your client can tolerate, how much they can tolerate, and how so that you can keep that as minimal as possible. The other thing that's interesting, I find, is that after doing this for a while, the low phenol diet's probably the second diet I learned about. So I've been doing that diet for 16 years now. And in that time, I've come up with my own ways of doing this provocative testing to determine that threshold of what they can tolerate. So what I've determined is it's not only, sometimes it's how much you can take at a time, sometimes it's how much you can do in a day, sometimes it's how much builds up over a few days, sometimes, it could be a variety of different things. And there are different ways to test it. Test a whole bunch of things all at once and see if there's a reaction, or a variety of, and that's often the way that's recommended by a lot of the diet creators. I don't always do that. In fact, I often choose other strategies. So there are different ways of doing that provocative testing because you don't want to overwhelm your client's system. I guess that could be tip number 16 if we're counting. Module 8, oxalates and the low oxalate. This, in addition to phenols, I'd say that phenols and oxalates are my two secret weapons in my nutrition arsenal for two reasons. One, they're incredibly powerful, and most people do not know anything about them. Most practitioners that your clients or patients have seen have never heard of these, or they might have been told by their practitioner, don't worry about them. So if you know how to address these, it's going to significantly improve your clinical results and set you apart from other people that are out there, because there's very few people that do these diets, and it is very much needed. So oxalate is an anti-nutrient. It inhibits mineral absorption. If you look at the studies on here, we have had studies from the 1930s showing that spinach can inhibit mineral absorption. So even though spinach is loaded with calcium, you cannot absorb the calcium in spinach, nor can you absorb the calcium in the rest of your meal, nor can you absorb the minerals in the rest of your meal or in that spinach very well, because oxalate is so incredibly high. You do not hear this anywhere in mainstream nutrition. And I think that's strange, given that we have known this for 80 years at least. Did I do my math right? Maybe according to this, 70 years, but it's probably, whatever my math is, a long time. But in mainstream medicine and mainstream nutrition, they're not really aware of this. In fact, they feel that the only way you can have an issue with oxalate is if you have kidney stones. And that was actually proved false by a study that came out recently. Well, actually, gosh, it feels like it was just yesterday. It was actually 2011. Boy, time goes by so fast. The study I'm pointing out here is a 3-fold greater increase in oxalate in the plasma and 2.5 times greater in the urine of people with autism. The researchers almost didn't get their study published because the oxalate researchers said that's not possible because they were screened for kidney issues, and that anybody in the study didn't have kidney issues. And so until even recently, even oxalate scientists didn't know this. So this is really new, cutting edge, amazing stuff. Reactions, you can get a lot of inflammation, pain. As we know, kidney stones are one of the most painful things. They have these sharp edges. But also when they get into the cell, they can get into the cell, into the mitochondria, and affect mitochondrial function. So when we have anybody with mitochondrial issues, pain issues, autoimmune issues, fibromyalgia, I've seen joint pains, all sorts of things associated, mitochondrial things, MS, mito issue, fibromyalgia, a mito issue, mitochondria. We don't want to be doing things that are going to impair our mitochondria if it's already affected. So we want to understand the condition someone has and all the different food compounds that may or may not be helpful depending on who they are. So that's when we look at labs, we look at symptoms, and we try to, and deficiencies, and we try to figure out how to help them. High oxalate foods, nuts. So to give you an example, spinach and a 1/4 cup of almond flour have about 450 to 500 milligrams of oxalate. That's 10 times the amount of oxalate that's allowed in an entire day on a low oxalate diet. Now, not everybody needs that level, but that's just to give you an example of how high these foods are. So a case study for this, a 50-year-old woman who was on a grain-free paleo diet. Her diet had lots of nuts and kale, chips and berries. She also had pyroluria, which is where you got a zinc and a B6 deficiency. She had significant pain in her feet, like walking on hot coals or shards of glass. When she took out oxalate, the pain went away. Debilitating pain after standing on her feet for speaking for days on the road, and gone when she took the oxalates and lowered them. Returned when she accidentally didn't realize some of the foods that she was eating that had crept in had high oxalate. So then she got pain and she called me and said, "What about this?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that's high." So really fascinating how powerful these foods can be for some people that need them. And then people tell me, "Oh, well, why not just fix the microbiome?" Well, oxalates can damage the microbiome, so you can't always simplify things down to just fix the underlying thing. I'm always telling my students, relieve the burden, then work on restoring the function. Then you can work on expanding the diet. You can have oxalate issues from endogenous production inside the system or from eating foods in the presence of a poor microbiome and a leaky gut, or just eating lots and lots of them, depending on who you are. So it's not always about diet. Sometimes there's deficiencies or other conditions that allow the body to actually produce more oxalate on its own. So this is not just about taking the oxalates out. It's a combination of doing certain supplements and things to support the system while removing the foods that are causing an issue. And before I forget, I don't know if I have this tip or not. Okay, I'm going to add another clinical tip because I don't know if I mentioned it here. Always remove oxalates very, very slowly because it can cause damage and problems if you remove them too fast. So that if it's not in here as one of my clinical tips, we'll add that one on as another one. Clinical tip 11 is address both the dietary and the endogenous causes of high oxalate. So in this case, she had both exogenous from the diet and likely endogenous as well from certain nutrient deficiencies based on her personal biochemistry. So the diet works by reducing the burden coming in. This helps to release the stores, hopefully slowly because we are going to go slowly, and then supporting it with additional supplementation support and other things. Paleo diet, low carbs and ketogenic diet that we talk about in module 9. Grain-free versus low carb. So a grain-free diet is going to be lower in carbs typically because grains are so concentrated in carbs, but not necessarily a low-carb diet. So specific carbohydrate diet gaps are specific carbohydrate diets, not low carbohydrate diets. They could be made a low carbohydrate diet, but inherently they're not intended to be that, and not everybody wants their specific carbohydrate diet to be low. So just be aware of that. A low-carb diet is also not necessarily ketogenic. So it could be lower in carbs or low carb, but there's a big range in low carb, and that may or may not be ketogenic as well. So when we look at a low carb diet, it varies greatly. We could do a lower carb than the average American, and that could be maybe 40 to 45% of calories. We could do less than 20% of calories, or we could do a ketogenic diet, which is typically 5 to 10% of calories. When we look at low carb versus keto, as I said, all low carbs, not necessarily keto. Some benefit by lowering it. Other people need a ketogenic diet in order to use ketones. There's other ways to boost ketones without doing a ketogenic diet. We talk about that a little bit. There's some cool studies on that. But other times people inadvertently lower carbohydrates too much They don't have the adequate, either they don't need it or they don't have the adequate ability to go into a ketogenic state or a state of ketosis. So it's important to know the person. Ketones are when we get into this state of ketosis where we're using ketones as our primary source of fuel. And they can be neuroprotective, they can reduce inflammation, they can lower free radicals in the cell. But it's not always right for everybody. So determining when it's right for somebody and when it's not right, to me, is really important, because the ketogenic diet has become super popular today, but it concerns me because everybody's talking about it, but nobody is, I don't think, adequately addressing the concerns of those people that can't do it. You hear all the wonderful things, but never hear about the kids or the adults that don't do well. So I want to share a quick case study. I have heard this story more than once about a child with mitochondrial dysfunction. Many kids with autism have mitochondrial dysfunction, and sometimes people will put somebody on a diet because of that mitochondrial dysfunction, and sometimes it can be a great alternative, but in some cases it makes the child worse instead of better, because a crash in blood sugar will crash and affect the mitochondria. So now you got a bigger crash happening. So sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. So we look at clinical tip number 12, the common mistake that practitioners make of being too dogmatic. The ketogenic diet in this instance is not right for everyone. It can be great for some people with mitochondrial issues, terrible for other people with mitochondrial issues. So again, as part of my thinking, I'm always trying to gather the data. Who does well with it? Who doesn't? And I recently had Dr. D'Agostino on my Autism Summit. Maybe some of you were there. And he went into some of those areas. And I think that was really helpful. Module 10. And the last one we're going to cover today of the different of the different modules. And then we'll get into some more info for you. So methylation is a huge factor. Depression, anxiety, cancer, heart disease, neurological issues, neural tube defects, Down syndrome, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, ADHD, all conditions that have underlying methylation challenges. So someone might think, all right, let's add foods with methylating nutrients. Let's add some folate, some different B vitamins, some magnesium, some zinc, some choline, some B12, the things that are going to help us get those pathways going. And I think those are great ideas, great principles. With that said, clinical tip number 13 is being too simplistic. So while that might be true, while your client might do great in simply getting more nutrients that are rich in these foods, the challenge is that if we, for example, say, ooh, we need more folate, let's add a ton of spinach, you can see where I'm going with this. Those foods are not always the right foods for individuals. So beets, adding betaine. Beets are high in oxalate. They don't work for some people. Or spinach being high in salicylates or oxalates or whatever it might be. So being too simplistic and saying, oh, I know what you need. You've got methylation issues. Add more of these foods. Might be a good idea. Might be too simplistic. Clinical tip number 14. When methylation isn't functioning well, be aware that any compounds or foods be aware of other compounds and foods that can be affected when methylation isn't working well. So if I go back to that slide I just skipped over, when methylation isn't working well, we don't have good transsulfuration and we don't have good sulfation, which means you could have a breakdown in these pathways in a variety of things. You could have an issue with sulfation, glutathione, oxidative stress, mitochondrial function, leaky gut and dysbiosis. This might mean that even though this is affected up here at methylation, you might not be handling some of these other things. I think I have some of these foods. Oh, I don't have them, but I'll share some of them with you. So, you know, some people, we didn't even talk about, some people might, if they have poor sulfation, they might have oxalate issues, and the oxalate might get into the cell on the sulfate transporter. So you go back here to methylation, it might down the road affect salicylates, amines, histamines, glutamates. It might affect oxalates, and it might affect any of the gut stuff. So theoretically, it could affect any of those diets or any of those foods that people might not tolerate. So that is, that's our mini course. The course itself also goes into lab testing, how to choose the right labs, how to get information on which diet and which supplements to do based on what the labs say. We do talk about information on what supplements to consider. And then we put it all together with module 12, which is determining a bioindividual nutrition approach. And so that's going to look at how you put everything we just talked about together to create a phased approach, a prioritizing approach, how to make it work, how to do it so it's doable for your client and give them the results that they need. So in module 1, we just talked about gaining a system or a methodology for bioindividualizing diet so that you're going to have a framework that's repeatable and so you can get consistent results as you go. Module 2, you're going to gain information on 25 different diets so that you're going to have the confidence to answer any question that a client or patient could walk in asking. Module 3, you're going to gain knowledge and tools on how to educate your people without recreating the wheel on what a good nutrient-dense diet looks like, no matter which of the special diets that you're doing for them or suggesting for them, so that they have the educational materials to know what that is and to apply those strategies to get good results. Modules 4 through 9 are going to cover all the different therapeutic diets, all the different food compounds, and we're going to jump into not only what they are, not only the foods to avoid, but also the foods to include. We're going to talk about the common symptoms for each one, implementation guidelines for each one, test back guidelines for each one, benefits and pitfalls, the underlying biochemistry involved, the scientific referencing, the clinical applications, when you would use them, supplementation support, lifestyle support, when to use the diet, when to combine it, when to break the rules, everything you could think for every single one of those diets. Module 10, you're going to gain concise and usable information on these really complex biochemistry subjects so that you're going to be able to discuss them and address them with diet and nutrition recommendations. And then in module 11, you'll gain an understanding of how the labs help determine your bioindividual nutrition strategy for special diets and supplements so that you can customize a diet to that person's specific needs with the most information possible. And then module 12 is you're going to gain a clinically derived methodology on how to pull it all together and create a bioindividual nutrition strategy plan so that you can get outstanding and consistent results with your clients. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to share a little bit about the training for those of you who might be interested. If you are a parent on the line, we have special things for you. If you're a practitioner that works or doesn't work with autism, I'll share a little bit about that as we go as well. So we talked about the training program this is what I call the foundational program. Everybody that's a bioindividual nutrition practitioner goes through the foundational training program. So when I say bioindividual nutrition training program, it's this. And everything we talked about today. It includes all the modules, our private Facebook group. It includes ongoing coaching calls and office hours where, in fact, we just had one, I think yesterday, time's going by. And so each month there's ways to connect with me and connect with other practitioners on this information. And our Facebook group, I have to say, is super dynamic. We have Susan Owens on there and all sorts of other people that share amazing info. So let me just say, so that's the foundational training program. That is for all diets and all chronic disorders. It has 12 modules, as you saw. It's about 28 hours of content. It includes handouts and the dietary assessment that I showed you. And then there's a secondary add-on training course just for people like you that work with kids with autism, ADHD, Down syndrome, allergies, asthma, and a variety of chronic conditions related to kids, or conditions that maybe are known childhood conditions, but you might be working with like adults with autism as well, or adults with ADHD and things. But this pediatrics training is called our Pediatric Intensive. It can be added to the foundational training, and that I often call that our pediatric program. So it's the foundational training plus the Pediatric Intensive. Oh, and that one I just kind of mentioned there. That one is all of those childhood conditions, 7 modules, 16 hours of content with special handouts and tools specifically for people that work with kids. So I'll show you that in a moment. So I mentioned this in the training, you get all the audio and video presentations, the PDFs of the slides, the transcripts, you get downloadable MP3 recordings, and all sorts of other handouts and information and tools. So you've got the done for you handouts. There's handouts for every one of the diets. There are food lists on the back. There are, even right now, I'm working on meal plans for each of the diets and combination food lists that I hope to have out in the next few months. So not just an oxalate list or a GAPS list, but a list of if you're on GAPS and need to be low oxalate, or GAPS, oxalate, and low salicylate, or whatever those combinations are. So we have not only the individual diets, but the combination food list and all the and meal plans that go along with those. And those are in the works right now. So, and one of the cool things is that I'm always adding new things to the course. So even for my practitioners that joined 4 years ago, they are going to get all this updated information that you're going to get as well. So as the course gets updated, you get all that updated information in the membership area. We got practitioner tools. We've got on this online assessment questionnaire that I mentioned, this electronic version that has weighted scores for the different symptoms. So it's more likely to help you determine which symptom clusters are more likely to mean one diet versus another. I've got a symptom and a symptom diet chart for people. I've got decision-making flow charts. We've got all sorts of resources. We've got, you get my book, you get my cookbook, my videos, my pyramid, my tools that you can use these pyramids in your practice. We have people that put them on their wall and use it so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can hand these out to people. So you're going to get, you also get, to help you succeed along the way, you can join at any time. And when you join, you'll get ongoing support for where you are. So we have a study guide for both programs. The study guide will take you through quizzes, fill in the blank things, all sorts of things to get you competent and confident to take the final exam. So you can be listed in our member directory, but also things that you can apply in clinical practice. So we have a clinical practice toolkit where we have clinical practice exercises, whether you're new to practice or experienced, and a client action checklist so that you can use that with your clients. That was actually developed for the moms. That we occasionally have parents or other individuals that want to take this training for their own health. And that actually was originally, I created that so that if a mom or an individual wanted to like say, oh, in this module, have you looked at this? Have you tested this? Have you considered this? And then I realized all the practitioners can make good value of that too. So I made it available for both of those groups. And as I mentioned, there's ongoing office hours and coaching support. You get listed on our online directory if you're a practitioner and you have taken the final exam. And then a little bit about the pediatrics program for people that are interested in that. That is this add-on course that I mentioned. We talk about the biochemistry of autism and all different types of special needs, as I mentioned. Down syndrome is one of my favorites, but autism, I guess, is my first, of course. But just most people think that Down syndrome is merely a genetic condition, and therefore there's nothing you can do. And that's also not true. So I love talking about all the different conditions. But when you work with children, as many of you do, you know it's so much different to work with a child. You've got picky eating needs. You've got a less sort of sophisticated palate. You've got sensory issues. You've got behavioral challenges. You've got Other things you just need to know about, like autism. Or when I first got started, people would say, "Oh, I'm going to see a cranial sacral therapist," or "I'm going to see we're doing vagus nerve toning," or all these things. I had no idea. Now, I didn't need to be an expert in those things, but I wanted to understand the bigger picture of what my client was going through so I could be the most helpful, or maybe even recommend some of these adjunct things like speech, like feeding therapy or something else that somebody might need. So in the training, you get just a bit of a broader picture of what these families are going through, so you can feel confident when you're working with them that you understand when they mention some things, what's going on. Or you can chat in our Facebook group and say, what is this thing that they're talking about? So we'll give you a lot of support for where you are. How to make meal plans for kids, how to adapt recipes for kids. We have special intake forms for kids, special intake forms for autism, special clinical handouts for people with autism. Some of those, the intensive course, this is the modules. So we go into the biochemistry of all the chronic conditions, the deficiencies with all these conditions, the digestion and the microbiome with all of these conditions. We talk about mood, behavior, and energy regulation and which diets are good. We talk about nutrition and special diets for kids and how they're different. So I would actually apply a ketogenic diet differently for a child than I do for an adult. So we talk about those types of things. Meal planning and recipes for kids, support for picky eaters, which is huge. You cannot just give your standard meal plan to a child and expect that they're going to be able to do it. Occasionally, but I would say that is the vast minority of my clients. And then case studies for people that are out there. How does this work? What's working? What does it look like? What are the possibilities? Some of the tools that are specific for the pediatrics program, in addition to all the things that you get with the foundational training, a special child and autism intake form. The intake forms on both courses are you can brand them to use. You can put your logo on there. Step-by-step guide for GFCF success for kids, meal plans and recipes for kids, food pyramids, special teaching tools for kids, daily trackers for kids, special vegetable handouts and things for kids, how to pack lunches on a special diet for kids. Of course, you get Nourishing Hope and Cooking to Heal as well, and the ebook. So lots of really cool things. If you work with kids, you're definitely just going to want to do the full pediatric program. But I want to separate those two if you don't work with kids, so you kind of know the difference there. And of course, I give a full 100% money back guarantee for any reason. One time I had somebody that they ended up having a health crisis, and they thought that they were going to be able to have more time, and they didn't have the time. I don't want you to be stressed out. If you don't have the time right now, if you can't do it right now, if it's not right for you, that's fine. Take a look at it, see, 30 days, no risk, I'll give you your money back. So I think that's really, as far as I'm concerned, important for me as a practitioner to have that integrity, and for you to feel comfortable with taking this step. And then this is a little bit more about me and my website and how you can find us. But in addition, while I go to answer these questions for you, I just want to show you the special offer that we have going now. So if you look, it should be posted now. Martin, I don't know if you can take a peek or not and see and make sure I got that posted right. But you can get the link because the link's not on the website, because the link is not available. The special offer is not available on the regular website because it's not available to everybody. So you want to use this link if you're interested in the special discount. And this special discount is $1,000 off the training program for the two programs put together. We also have, if you are a practitioner that doesn't work with kids and you just want our foundational program, at the bottom, there's a link that you can contact us, and we can give you a special link for also a special offer for that program, if you want to do that one. Also, if you're a parent or an individual that wants to use this in your practice, we have a very special scholarship that you can apply for. So if that's your situation, definitely you can find us on that special page and email us, and we can get you that special link too. So, and that's a very significant discount. And I wanted to do that for moms because you're not going to use it in your practice. You're not going to be, using this to help other people. You're using this for your own support. And so I wanted to give you something that would allow you to be able to make this training cost effective for you. So I will go ahead and answer questions for you now. All right, I'm going to start at the beginning here. All right. All right, see people, clinical nutritionist specializing in autism, mental health, and neurological disorders. I love it. A dietitian nutritionist from Salt Lake City. Yay. We love RDs. We have lots of RDs. We are a all nutrition supportive community here. We love anybody in any nutrition discipline. And I say that because sometimes we have warring factions, and that doesn't exist in ours. We love having you. All right. Yeah. Anne Marie wanted to know if we're going to be providing slides at the end. Yes, for those of you who stayed, we will be providing these slides for you in our special guidebook. All the slides will be in there, so you can have those. And let's see here. Great. Anne Marie is a functional nutritionist providing BioIndividual nutrition and wellness programs. Yay, wonderful. Let's see. Yes, there'll be a recording as well. There'll be a replay that's sent. Oral facial myofunctional therapist. I've actually done some of that therapy for myself, not as a training professional practitioner, but I have methylation issues. I have a tongue tie. I have TMJ, which many of you may realize is all connected. So I love people doing those awesome things in the world. So I'm so glad to have you join us. Alexandria asks, so ghee is the only dairy you allow typically for ASD clients and their family, right? What if they have GERD too? Ghee is super high in fat, which triggers GERD. Okay, so if somebody doesn't have a serious allergy, as I mentioned earlier, typically I've found ghee is okay from a casein perspective. So typically ghee would be the one sort of dairy-derived food that I might include on a GFCF diet or an ASD type of program. That doesn't mean that everybody tolerates ghee, whether it's because of an issue like you're describing here, or maybe they're super sensitive or something. Yes, it would be the only one, but it's not necessarily appropriate for everybody. Okay, she also asks, she said, a whole milk powder for it. Oh, maybe it is a whole milk powder available on Amazon that isn't ludicrously priced. Amazon sells other brands as well. Powder form I speak of. Are you suggesting camel's milk? Is that what you're wondering, if there's a powdered camel's milk formula or powdered camel's milk? There is. I don't know if it's less expensive some places than others. I know that Desert Farms makes, if that's what you're asking about, makes a camel's milk powder. And you can order it from them directly as well. Clan says, I'm hyperoxaluric, and whenever I use methylating agents, SAMe, methionine, TMG, I get mania, agitation. Any forms of B9, which is folate, and B12 cause serum values to go way above range. SIBO expected, low FODMAPs better. Is there anything else you would recommend to better my situation, specifically around compounds and foods that might be an issue for my hyperoxaluria? Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so just a caveat, I can't actually give personal advice or nutrition advice without doing a consultation with someone and spending, a couple hours really understanding their situation. So please don't take this as personal advice, but let me give you some things to think about that you might research further that might be helpful. A couple things. People that have hyperoxaluria or people that have high oxalate, sometimes certain nutrients like B6 or other things like that, especially B and B1, things that are low that can trigger endogenous production, when they start to get replenished, the body starts dumping oxalate and then people get symptoms. So my question for you would be, are these methylating agents an issue because you're not tolerating the form? Is it an issue because it's dumping, it's allowing you or causing you to dump oxalate too quickly and you're getting a reaction from that? Let's see, SIBO suspect low FODMAPs. Is anything else? Those are two of the first things that come to my mind. I think that, this is a good point for anybody that addresses people that have oxalate issues, is you typically want to go very slowly. So you want to take out the stuff very slowly and you want to add in the good stuff very slowly, because that can definitely cause dumping or challenges. So I'm wondering if that's what's going on. But you also could look at the different forms and see if there's a reason that they're saying that any form of folate in B12 causes the values to go way above range. Maybe, is it getting into the cell, or is it just not being able to be utilized, so it's floating around and it's being seen? So that's where things like getting an MMA level, methylmalonic acid level, might tell you whether that's getting into the cell to do its job. So you might do a little more testing and see if you can find out more data, or see if it's a form. And then if you're suspecting FODMAPs issues or SIBO, microbiome imbalances are often a factor with high oxalate levels. So there might be something there as well. So I'll kind of leave that one at that for now. Alexandria says raw milk is sour. As you know, in the US, pasteurization is mandatory. How can people get with sensory issues who hate sour to try it? Let's say they're not ASD. Also, what do you say about the risks associated with raw camel's milk? Do you think the same way for other raw versus pasteurized or tolerated milks? A couple things. Raw milk actually isn't sour unless it has soured. So raw milk, when it's fresh, is sweet like all other milk. But because it can ferment naturally by that good bacteria, it can sour more rapidly. So it also might depend on where you're getting your milk, how fresh it is, things like that. The other thing is that in the US, some states allow raw milk and some states do not. I do not recommend raw milk just randomly. I only recommend raw milk if if you know that it's a super clean source, that it's safe, that it's been tested, and so we're talking good quality, special raw milk. So keeping that in mind, I do think that there are some nutritional benefits to raw milk that are not in pasteurized milk. So if someone can tolerate it and can find a good source, I tend to like it. But it doesn't mean that, and some people tolerate it better, but it doesn't mean that it has to be raw. Some countries and states, as you said, you can't find it raw, and getting it pasteurized, especially with camel's milk, can still give you some of those great benefits, even when it has been pasteurized. So I would, and there are some people, again, bioindividually, that have more serious and compromised immune system, and maybe they can't take that risk. Pregnant women or, certain people with certain conditions, they might just not even want to go down that road. So I'm not suggesting it's for everybody. I'm just saying what I've seen is that its tolerance is typically better tolerated than other types. All right. Christine asks, what's the difference between being in the state of ketosis and acidosis? My 2-year-old is the latter, showing from the gastroenterology report. Well, there's ketoacidosis, but I'm guessing that's different than what you're saying here. I'm guessing you're suspecting some sort of an acidic condition. So if Christine has any more information she wants to give, there's ketoacidosis, which is a state that diabetics can get into, which is a very dangerous state. That's different from ketosis. And being too acidic, or depending on what the type of acidosis is, that is also potentially different. So I think I would need to know a little bit more to see if I can answer your question any better. Okay, Clan lost connectivity earlier. Not sure if the message went through. What compounds should I look out for in foods for the best results outside of the ones rich in oxalate? Okay, I did answer your question. So maybe if you listen to the recording. Now, if I didn't answer it well enough, that's a different issue. What other compounds should I look for in foods for the best results? That's going to be dependent on what is at the root of this. Are there more than one thing going on? If it's just oxalate, what's causing the oxalate issue? Is it dysbiosis? Is it pathogens? Is it leaky gut? If it is those things, there might be things like you mentioned earlier, like FODMAPs or other things that you might want to address that are going to be helpful. If it is mainly oxalate you're looking at, then you know that I think I kind of answered. I think I may have answered it in those two bits. If I didn't, let us know. Join our Facebook group and you can always ask me again. Let's see. Can you just do the pediatric training by itself? That is such a great question. People ask that all the time. Actually, you won't be able to make good use of the pediatric training without the foundational stuff, because I do not discuss any of those 28 hours in the extra 16 hours. The 16 hours requires the other understanding in order to make really any use of the other one. So it is not a standalone course on its own. So if you want to take the pediatric training, you want to do it in conjunction. And I know sometimes people ask about that, but there is so much information. Even if you feel like you know some of this information, it's going to be so much more information you learn about autism and all of those diets and all that underlying biochemistry in the first one, that you're not going to want to miss it, and you're not going to really be able to make use of the other one. So yes, okay, so no, you can't just do the pediatric training by itself. The link does not provide an option for just the foundation of the course. That is true.
Refresh your browser about now. Refresh it, and those links are getting set up at the bottom of that page.
Sorry about that. Martin just put those links on the bottom of that page in the last 5 minutes. He's been working diligently over there because I really wanted people to be able to look at that one by itself.
Well, make sure the discount was applied to the foundations course only.
I'm sorry, what was that you said?
I had to make sure that the discount was applied.
Oh, yes. And Martin had to make a special, he's been working feverishly to make sure there was a special landing page that had a special way to buy it with the discount applied to that. Because again, if you just went to the website, it wouldn't have that special discount. So right now, if you refresh that page, you should see at the bottom, do they have both the offers?
Yes.
Okay, you should have both where to click at the bottom if you just want the foundations course, and if you are a individual or a parent wanting the scholarship to do this just for yourself. All right. Thanks for telling me that, Grace. Okay, let's see. I'm going to just in our time, let's see. I want to make sure. Let's see here. Let me go ahead and answer Doris's question because she hasn't asked a question yet. I see a bunch of others of people that have answered questions, which I'm happy to do, but I want to make sure I get at least everybody's at least one question answered for everybody. So her question is suggestions on increasing phenol tolerance. Yes, I like to use a combination of reducing those foods down to the threshold they can tolerate, and then boosting those underlying pathways. So some of the things I talk about both in my book and actually more things I talk about in the training are avoiding things that are going to deplete the pathways and working on things that are currently depleting the pathways. So dysbiosis, toxins, getting sulfate levels boosted up. There are ways to do that transdermally. There's ways to do that orally. There are pros and cons to each of those, which I don't think I have the ability to go into now, but some people don't respond as well to oral, so they'll do transdermal, and there's different ways. There's creams and baths and other things. There are enzymes that some people will use to try to help break things down more so that they can get better phenol tolerance, like a no phenol enzyme by Houston Enzymes, boosting the methylation, boosting the transsulfuration, boosting nutrients and minerals in general. Those are a few. Those are a bunch of the things that I can think of. Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead. Okay, so Grace is saying there's a promo code for the Foundations course only. The discount does not show up, nor does the payment plan option.
Have her either email me or quicker browser and refresh it.
Did you give a link to a special landing page, or did you give a code? So I can get.
It should automatically show the discount price for the Foundation.
So there's not a code there?
No, you shouldn't need to use a code.
Okay. Okay. So here's what I suggest. If you're having any trouble, email us. Is the customer service chat working right now?
Oh, let me turn that on.
Okay, Murren's going to turn the customer service chat on. You'll be chatting with him if you get him. So if you're having any trouble with any of these things, you can do one of three things. You can email us at info@nourishinghope.com. You can chat with us live with the live customer service chat. Or you can try refreshing your browser again, because it shouldn't require a code. It should just show that discount applied. So normally that would be $29.97 for the training. There is a $500 discount, so it should be $24.97. If you buy both courses, there's an additional $500. So if you're doing the one training, there's a $500 discount. If they're doing two trainings, there's a $1,000 discount. Those should be automatically applied. You should see $2,500 or $24.97 for the one course, the foundational course, and $34.97 for the two courses. If you don't see that, contact us. And if you are needing to see the special scholarship page so you can apply for a scholarship if you're a family, that link should be there, and you should be able to apply for that. And if you have any trouble with that, also, you can contact us in those different ways. All right, let's see. Jill is not seeing the parent option. Is the parent option on the bottom there?
Have a refresh. It is there.
I'm going to see.
Link to the parent. Here, you know what?
I'm going to see if I can find it. Yes, darling.
I'll put the link at the top of the chat also for people, because they're the non-practitioner page.
Okay. Martin is going to put some links in the chat if you want to go there directly, because maybe the link isn't working for some reason, or what, to make it easier.
There is a link now at the bottom of the page that will take you over to that.
There's currently a link at the bottom of the page that will take you to the parent training, but for some reason, sometimes, like if you have your browser, your history is cached. If you haven't quit your browser, it doesn't show that it's been updated. So Martin's going to put that link. That link is there now. That is the special for the non-practitioners. So this is really for people that are using it only for themselves or their child. And that's why we give such a substantial discount. That's not available to practitioners, because practitioners are going to be using the handouts in their practice. They're going to be using the tools in their practice. Obviously, they have more capacity, and they're going to be making more use of the resources. So we give a super duper thing because we really want to support families that need that, and that is available for those families. Okay, is there a difference between your course and the NTA programs? So that's a great question. We love NTA, and we actually sometimes will do NTA study groups. In fact, we have a special NTA group within ours. So in fact, we love NTA, and they love us, and we work synergistically together. So a couple of years in a row, I presented at their conference. I did a pre-conference workshop. We had special study groups for your people. We have some of those recordings of those special study groups we did. And so if you're an NTA person, I will say a couple things. Let us know, because we'll get you the special extra lessons to show you how to incorporate it with your functional evaluation technique and your NAC and all of that kind of stuff. So that's one part of it. Now, if your question is, how does our training differ from their training? Vastly. And that's why we like to recommend their training for people that need a certification in nutrition. And that's why they recommend our training for people that want to get certified and specialize in therapeutic diets and bioindividual nutrition. So we have a lot of NTA people, which is Nutrition Therapy Association for people that are listening that don't know. But the trainings are very, very different. They're complementary. All right. All right, everybody. Okay, I think I've done as much as I could of answering specific questions. I know I wasn't able to get to everybody's super, super specific ones. I'm sorry I couldn't, answer everybody's super personal questions, both because we don't have our time in this forum, and because I probably don't have the capacity without knowing a lot more about your child's situation. So hopefully I gave you some good things to start with. Some of the practitioners on the line got some good information as well. If there's anything else I can do to support you, let us know. We'll make sure that you stay connected with us with Bioindividual Nutrition. And thank you so much for joining us. And if there's anything we can do, don't hesitate to contact us at info@bioindividualnutrition.com. So thanks everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad you came. Give us feedback. How did you like the mini course? Was it helpful for you? And what can we do to support you in the future? So thanks everyone. Have a great day. And I wish you all the best.